Your inner geek wants to come out and play, but where to go? Join Vernon Wells, the ultimate club where you and your fellow geeks can hang out, play games, and just nerd out 24/7. Whether you love RPGs, video games, or are just a major fan of sci-fi and geek culture, Vernon Wells has something for everyone. Let your geek flag fly at Vernon Wells. Sign up today and see for yourself. VNW.club. That's VNW.club.
Ladies, gentlemen, geeks of all ages, you are now entering BJ Shea's Geek Nation. Welcome.
Yes, welcome to BJ Shea's Geek Nation. I am the Reverend Enfuego. Across from me is Vicky Barcelona. We've got Uncle Chris. The show's namesake is on assignment.
Where is he, Rev?
I don't know where he is, Joey D's.
He gone.
But at least you're running the board.
That's what I'm here for.
On today's show, we have only one thing, but it is epic.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Vicky, how can people get a hold of us?
Get a hold of us via our website, bjgeeknation.com. It's going to have all our podcasts, all our information. And if you're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, BJ Geek Nation. Easy.
Exactly. And we're, without any further ado, we need to get into this because this is a highlight for the things that we have done on this podcast.
Chris
We've
is
spoken
losing
to
his mind.
many people.
It feels like a late birthday present just for me.
Yes, and it really, really, really is. So without any further ado, with us today is a man who, Chris, how would you describe this person?
On a personal note, I would describe this person as the man single-handedly responsible for getting me into fantasy fiction.
Wow.
Yes.
I picked up a copy of Elf Stones of Shannara in a used bookshop as a very, very young man. And in fact, I would even go so far as to say a young boy. This was before I had read Tolkien or I had even experienced the wonder of science fiction novels. But Elf Stones was my very first fantasy novel that I read cover to cover. And I read it 3 times in a row one summer, and it was just, it was amazing. And I said, there's got to be more of this. And then I found out, that's the second book in the trilogy. So then I went back and I read them in order. But yeah, that's how I describe him. But with us is Terry Brooks, author of the aforementioned Shannara series, the hugely successful Shannara series. The man has over 21 million copies of his books in print, 23 New York Times bestsellers during his career. Mr. Brooks, it is an amazing pleasure and honor for me to sit here and talk to you today. Thank you so much for coming in to talk to us about your new book.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I want to ask you how your mother felt about the fact that you turned into what you seem to be now, which is one of the Borg.
Funny you should mention. My mother was a dyed-in-the-wool Trekkie, and she was just fine with it.
Good for your mother.
And yeah, so you have made your name a name for yourself with the Shannara Chronicles over the last 40 years because it came out. The first one came out in 1977, and now you're going into, not even going into, but now the new book out, Street Freaks, is heading into the sci-fi genre. How is that for you going from the science fiction, or going to the science fiction from fantasy?
Well, surprisingly enough, it was pretty easy. And the reason is because I tell everybody the same thing. Even though I'm marketed as fantasy, it's really a scam. What I'm writing are adventure stories, and it's like Star Wars. When I met Lucas years ago, and we were talking about doing Phantom Menace. First thing I said to him when we sat down was, "You sure you got the right guy?" And he says, "Yeah, well, I think so." And I said, "Well, I don't write science fiction." And he said, "Well, that's all right. Neither do I." And I said, "You're like me. You write adventure stories." And he said, "Yes, that's what I write, as adventure stories." And I thought, well, yeah, that's about what we're doing here. This could be a Western. It could be, just about anything. So I think for me to make that transition had more to do with the fact that it was time to write something new, number one, but it was also time to challenge myself again. And it's one of those things I learned a long time ago. You need to challenge yourself as a writer by doing something different about every 10 or 12 years.
Oh, that's a good call.
It helps keep you sharp, and it also forces you to work hard for a change instead of just skating along with the same old thing.
So tell us a little bit about Street Freaks then.
Well, I started writing Street Freaks about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And the idea came from thinking about a story where somebody this young man has everything stripped away from him all at once and is put on the run, and he doesn't know why. And then he not only discovers he doesn't know why, he doesn't even know who he is for sure.
Oh, wow.
That he is perhaps, because we're in a futuristic world here where synthetics and robotics, test tube genetic children are being created, he might be one of those, even though he thinks of himself as being absolutely normal.
And that's an interesting point because with a lot of young adults, they're really looking for and searching for that identity. And sometimes they don't know who they are or who they want to be or who they can become. And so it really plays into that.
And they feel like that the whole world's against them and they have to run from everything. And definitely as a teenager, I could or when I was a teenager, that was definitely what I was drawn to and kind of what I'm still drawn to now because I never grew up.
Well, they say, Vicky, write what you know. And I do. And I was that kid, too. I was a geeky little kid back in the 60s, 50s, for that matter.
Before it was cool.
Before anybody knew what the word was. And I was that kid. I was a science fiction boy. I grew up reading science fiction starting at about the age of, 12, seriously. And I read everything in about 2 years because you could do that in those days.
So like with Shannara, with Chris, what drew you into that? Do you remember the first things that brought you into that?
Well, Lord of the Rings is what got me the form. And I had gone through a couple different stages, and I hadn't written anything in fantasy at all. And I didn't read Lord of the Rings until I was, I think, 22.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But when I did read it, it made a huge impact on me, and I loved the whole concept of the quest, and I had always... And I admired the fact that he was really the proponent of not having your protagonist be a prince or a king or somebody special, but just this ordinary guy. And I wanted to capture that too. So that was kind of where it went. And I had never written a book. I'd written about 50 pages of book starters that immediately died away, And then I got into doing this, and lucky for me, it was the right place at the right time. But it was easy to get into for me. It really was.
So you started working on your latest book 5 years ago, and we've gotten a lot of different sci-fi movies and shows and books, and obviously J.R.R. Tolkien was one of your inspirations. Who would you consider your inspiration or inspirations for this book?
Well, I don't know that I could pick any one person. I can't tell you of another story that's quite like this in terms of its structure. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're in the age of young adult fiction now being acceptable.
Yes,
safe to come out of the closet now with young adult fiction, even if you're an old guy, and read it. And I do. I read a lot of it. And, of course, much of it is fantasy because fantasy is now the 800-pound gorilla in every art form we know. So, and I know a lot of these young adult writers, too. I meet them along the way, and they genuflect and say, oh, it's the old dude. And I...
but they say it very respectfully.
They say
it's the Godfather of fantasy.
Yeah, the Godfather.
There we go.
I like that.
Yeah, I like this.
And it carries a certain threat as well as being...
it's like, don't mess with me.
Yeah, don't mess with the Godfather.
Here you come on the day of my daughter's wedding.
Yeah. So yeah, I've read a lot of those young writers, and I don't know. They write a lot about, as you were saying earlier, a lot about this particular aspect of being a kid growing up and struggling with these things. And I kind of worked that way into it, but I didn't want it to be a fantasy because that's so much like what I was doing. So I decided to just move it ahead in time, and I particularly wanted to talk about the next big prejudice.
Which is?
Because we are a world in which everybody is prejudiced all the time.
Yeah.
Except, if you pull back on yourself and say, but we've done religion, we've done race, we've done nationality, we've done sexual persuasion, we've done religion. What the hell's left? I don't know. Oh, wait a minute. I know it's going to be when we start to do our medical advances and scientific procedures that make people not normal people.
Exactly.
And they will be marginalized.
Yes.
They will be marginalized, and they will be regarded as, well, they're not really human.
And this is a really good point because somebody had mentioned to me at one point, it's like, oh, would you do cybernetics? And it was instantly yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely 100%. Maybe not I won't be the first adopter because I would like for them to work out the bugs.
There we go.
Let me guess, big ol' arm. Like everyone's all about the new arm, like between.
Well, either maybe a third arm, that'd be kind of fun, or it's just something as simple as like a data jack. When you're looking at something like, Shadowrun or any of those the sci-fi things, it's like, oh, I could have all the information, or like with the Matrix, oh, I know Kung Fu. Like it's one of those things where I can just learn something instantly and not even need the phone. I would totally do this.
Yeah, but then what we're saying now is you become that marginalized portion of society. Is like, oh,
Yes.
you did what? Oh,
Or it could even be the other way around.
distasteful. Then they become
We're
the elites.
tainted by our choices and by those who disparage what we've done. And the question is, what's different between 3 arms and 1 arm?
That's a good point.
What's the difference between any of these things you can think of that are disabilities that we are now finally starting to recognize, and particularly with mental disabilities, that are things that can be embraced and celebrated rather than treated as a kind of a reason to call somebody an outcast.
And it brings me back to there was a story a couple of years ago. There was a man in France who decided that he wanted a cybernetic eye. And so he, like I said, first adopter sort of thing, did it himself. Ooh. And he was in a fast food restaurant or something like that. And people beat him up because he looked weird. He looked different. Why would you do that to your own face sort of thing?
Yeah, well, what's different than that and being a metalhead? And wearing all that metal, and defacing your beautiful features.
Right, you're looking at me when you're saying that. I don't know, like, my nose ring. Hey.
But I just felt like this is where we are right now. We're already having this big debate about using children's. I'm lost for words here.
Stem cells.
What?
Stem cells.
Yes.
Oh
stem
gosh,
cells.
yes.
Look at the response we're getting to that. Mostly by old white man, but let's forget about that for just a minute. Nevertheless, it's out there, and it's not going to go away, and it's not going to become lessened or moved away. It's going to continue to develop because that's the nature of who we are.
Yeah.
So we will find new ways. We'll have new test tube babies. We'll have new synthetics, and there'll be medical improvements on organs that have failed. That's already underway. It won't just be transplants. You'll get a new knee.
Homegrown,
How long before you get, a new, liver, new artificial heart that are created synthetically?
You can 3D print so many things now. Mm-hmm. It would stand to reason that you can do any of this, and it's it's interesting to see that, and it's also it's fun to be able to read this in a book and how it will interject with this story of a child finding himself, growing up, and figuring out exactly who he is.
Okay, I got a 2-part question. So Shannara Chronicles has become a TV show, which I absolutely love.
Same.
What was it like to see these characters that you wrote on screen? Were they kind of like what you imagined them, or how would you have done it differently, or are you glad they did it the way they did?
Well, I was happy with the show. Let me start by saying that, because a lot of people think, oh, you must have hated that show. And the fact of the matter is, I didn't hate that show, because number one, as I keep saying from a purely mercenary point of view, that show sold a lot of books.
Yeah.
And I'm all about the book.
Right?
Yeah. It brings a whole
Just
generation
think about
back.
that.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of new readers I would not have gotten otherwise. But from the standpoint of the show, which I consider to be the right hand, and the books, which are the left hand or the other way around, doesn't matter. They don't have to be the same. And I've never been a kind of writer who has a visual on some actor or whatever playing the role, or that this character needs to look like this. I've never done that. And if you read the books, you'll see that I'll give you just enough so you can use your own imagination, because that's what I think. That's how people connect with books that you don't connect with in anything visual. Visual, if it's Arnold Schwarzenegger up there, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
But with the book, everybody sees the characters differently, and I really like that, and I think it's necessary for them to invest in what they're reading. So were these actors right? They were right as far as I was concerned. And not only that, but they were very nice people. I liked them a lot.
Really?
I spent time with them, and
They seemed really cool.
They were very cool, and they were quite a diverse group. but all very respectful of each other. And one of the things that told me once I got over the shock of seeing how big this production was, which took a day or two, I discovered talking to the people who worked on set, not as actors, but just as, whatever, griffs or whatever they call them, gophers, that these actors were very, very helpful on set. Always pitching in to help out wherever they were needed. Worked long hours, never complained.
No ego really with them at that.
No ego, and
that
they were young and mostly new. Not all of them. I mean, some of them were like John Rhys Davies was not exactly a newbie,
Right.
and James Remar and so forth.
Yeah.
So they were great, but the young ones particularly were a revelation because I was all ready for the Hollywood.
The big machine
The
sort of
diva.
thing.
The diva this and that, and none of them were like that, none at all.
That makes it even better. And
Yeah, it does.
one of the things I really love about the TV series is how diverse it is and how open it is. And it's just there's a little bit of everything. So I feel in a sense, I could be there.
Well,
'cause-
you know what? That was very
Intentional?
intentional.
You did
and
good
I
work.
talked with
Good.
the writers about it early on, and I said, here's what I want you to do, besides not wreck my book. And that was to remember that this is the future. And I see the future as multinational, multicultural. It's going to be that way more and more because we're now so mobile and so interconnected that it can't go any other way. And so, instead of saying, let's have the same old 10 white actors, let's get some different nationalities in there. Let's change this around. The book never really spells that out anyway. So, it doesn't say, here's a white 30-year-old guy, it doesn't say that. So don't do it. Get some, and they were so good about that, bringing in Eritrea's actress who came out of Pan's Labyrinth. She was the star of Pan's Labyrinth. And some of the other characters, many from all different places. And they asked me about I can't think of his name now, but the guy who played Garrett Jax. And I did hear from a few people, well, he's not black in the book. And I said, well, how do you know?
Yeah.
Dude, I love Jax. I love him. That was the best casting.
I
that
said,
could have been
if
done
you want
for
to
him.
if you want to make Al-Anon black, or you want to make him, Latino or whatever, I don't give a damn. Do it. Let's challenge the obvious and do something different here.
Which is awesome because I was actually having this conversation with somebody recently. Growing up, because I'm Mexican American, and my cousin's also Mexican American. She's a lot darker than me. So when we were little, I got the white baby doll, and she got the black baby doll. And it never felt right because I'm like, this doesn't feel right. There's nothing for us, the ones in the middle. And so to grow up, and now is the perfect age. I'm so excited for my nieces and nephews. They get to grow up in this era of awesome geekdom that is very inclusive with sexual orientation and race and everything. So, and I have to give your books and the show credit for being one of those that are out there and doing it.
Well, I've seen this. I've seen the future here in the last 20 years. And I saw it first with my grandson, who's now 22, when I went to the school, grade school Christmas pageants and things like that. And that was the most diverse group of people I've ever seen in a school. When I was going to school, it was white across the board.
Yeah.
Well, this was all kinds of family real setups, of different kinds. There was no one family dimension to this, and all different ethnic persuasions. And then the next time is when I was talking to my daughter, who's a grade school teacher in Auburn. And she says, I have Eastern European country children, about half my class, and they do not speak English. Wow. And I said, well, how do you handle that? And she says, we just throw them in, and we said, there's always somebody there who speaks their language, and then they start to teach them, and they all want to speak the English language. They just need somebody to help them along. So the classmates all pitch in, and they're the teachers.
That is awesome.
And isn't
That's
that great?
great.
That's great.
I thought, oh my God, she says, I have no way I can do this. I just have to talk. They have to translate, and they sit together, and that's how they get the job done.
I had that in middle school. We had a gal come in from Venezuela, and she didn't speak any English. So they're like, all right, you're one of 3 Mexican kids at the school. So they paired her with me, and she learned English really quick. And it was a fun experience to be able to learn and translate. So it's really awesome to see that, starting at a young age.
Well, it's so important. And I just, in all my books, I'm writing about something current. if you've noticed. All about the environment back in the early 90s. Then I was writing about transgression and redemption forever, it seemed like, with Grianne Omsford. And so, that's where you get inspired to come up with stories that are based around some of these particular issues that are present. And, right now, this was in part, even before it was time to be so, inspired by the fact that what happens if we suddenly start forming camps? And we, as the red zone is in this book, a place where these people are supposed to stay.
Yeah.
Because they're not like us, and the rest of the population doesn't want to have these people traipsing around.
Reminiscent of like District 9 with the
Like
insects.
District 9,
yeah,
exactly right.
Yeah.
It's like history repeating itself, but in
it is.
different ways. And I
Always,
mean,
yeah.
if you look around in the world,
Well, you can, and what interests us is the relationships between people. I mean, we're always looking to understand better about the relationships between people, and you have to demonstrate it in some way in your storytelling in order for it to resonate. If you're in the fantasy or science fiction world, because if you can't connect with the story, it's probably not going to do very well. People aren't going to read it.
Absolutely.
And I know enough about storytelling to know that the way you do that is you make the people us. They're us. Even if they're in a different world, at a different time period, everything else, they're immediately recognizable for who they are.
And the latest book, Street Freaks, is coming out October 2nd, but you can pre-order it now if you just go to terrybrooks.net. And there's a bunch of different ways that they can pre-order it as well, correct?
I think so.
Yes.
Well, I'm looking here now, and I think the one
Stop
that
by
I'm
my house.
the most interested in is the $75 double-signed limited edition. That sounds
Christmas
amazing.
is coming up. Buy the gifts early.
I have to say that over the years, I've always thought, well, these specialty editions, that's not for me, and so on. Until I ran into Sean, of course, who took over my website and Facebook pages and sort of took over my life in many regards. But he convinced me that it was out there. And the fact of it is there are people in our field of geekdom who collect like
absolutely.
nowhere else. This doesn't happen in romance. This doesn't happen in mysteries. It happens in our field, and they will collect every edition, change, or whatever you want to do. Not everybody, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I want to say that you know how I learned this? Phantom Menace.
Really?
Remember? They came out with 4
yes.
different covers. You cannot believe the number of people that bought all 4 books.
I was working at a bookstore when that happened, and I tell you what, I can absolutely confirm that.
Oh, my
People would come
God.
in and they would be enraged. You don't have the Padme cover? I need it to complete my...
know.
You're buying 4 copies of the same book!
I know, and I told them,
But
I said,
they will.
this is the same book, don't
Yeah,
you? They said, no, we just want the
it's
cover.
not different.
It was. I actually just sent Rev a message. I was sending. I love The Crow. It is one of my favorite comic books, movies. It's just my jam. So I collect random. I have the cassette someone gave me. I don't have a cassette player. I got a little tipsy on my birthday and I ordered the VHS. I don't have a VHS player. And I recently also at like a half price books I got for $3. The TV series.
Yeah.
That was awful. Like
wow.
everyone keeps telling me is awful.
Oh, it
I
is.
still haven't watched it, but I have it.
That's amazing.
You know,
But I have to have it.
Why is that any stranger than collecting troll dolls?
It's not. It really
or
isn't.
any different than collecting those
Beanie Babies?
bobbleheads.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't
Oh,
get
the Funkos?
bobbleheads
Yeah,
at all.
yeah.
But others do, and
Yeah.
And it's funny that you even bring up the Phantom Menace, and because one of the greatest drunk purchases I've ever made was I was at a house party, and one of my friends
Yes.
had the
Oh
old
my God.
Blockbuster statues that they had for the Phantom Menace, and it's about a 5-foot tall Yoda, and he's like, "I'll sell it to you for $150," and it was like I couldn't PayPal him fast enough. Like it was like I am taking this,
Got to
and
have
it's-
this.
yeah, and it's in my living room now and it's like, why do you have that? It's like, why
Why not?
yeah.
Your target audience. Well done.
Is there something that you obsess over? I mean, besides writing, because you've done so many books, do you have time to obsess over anything else?
You know, I don't. Almost everything I obsess over is book related in some fashion. I do obsess over trying to meet other writers.
Oh, okay.
I will read a writer whose work I love, and I will find a way to hunt them down.
Nice.
For me, it's not so hard.
Right.
You know, I can always just call a publisher. I say, and say, I need to meet this author, and can you find it out? And they can always find out. But, I will do that because I want to meet them and spend time with them and see what makes them tick.
Oh wow!
I'm real interested. I go to all kinds of talks by writers who talk about why they write what they write, and for me, it's very energizing, and it helps me with my own writing because it gives me inspiration. And I get all. If you read something wonderful, then of course, I immediately want to do something better. I won't be able to do that necessarily.
I think that's a nerd thing too. Is just the spirit of competition.
Yes.
Like, whatever it is, it's like I need to compete.
It is. You really get caught up in it. So that's probably the main thing. I used to collect Marvel comics. This is kind of a famous story.
Oh, God,
I
please
collected I collected virtually all of the early Marvel comics. Mm-hmm. All of them.
Wow.
Whoa.
Whole sets, all Spider-Man, 1 through 100.
Oh, my
I stopped at
gosh.
100, with everything.
All right.
There you go.
And they disappeared.
No.
They did. I did a very foolish thing that I won't get into, but they disappeared. And then, lo and behold, about 10, 15 years later, one of my cohorts at the business where they'd been stolen from called and said, "You better sit down." And he said the police had been around because they'd been embezzled.
Oh.
And the police said they got search warrants, searched house, and they had all these checkbooks. And they said, "Do you know of any reason somebody would be missing comics from this firm?" And they'd all been stolen by this person and
the
sold
embezzler.
to unsuspecting dealers here and there. I guess probably not thinking too hard about why she happened to have all these
Exactly.
comics.
Yeah. Right.
And so, of course, can't get them back. They're gone
Right.
forever.
Damn.
And when I talked to the prosecutor, she ultimately got what she had coming. But in any case, the prosecutor said, "Well, what would you think would be a fitting crime?" And I said, "I'm not interested in the money. I want her taken to the square and lashed 100 times."
One for each
public.
comic book.
One for each issue of Spider-Man that she
Right,
stole. Yeah.
exactly right. I don't think they said we don't do that anymore.
It's not just taking away a possession; it's taking away like somebody else's world.
Yeah.
Like you go into these
Yeah.
comic books and you just kind of disappear for a little while, and that's just
harsh.
It was a real violation, and it was actually I had collected them all and put them back to be my grandson's education fund. Sure. Assuming I ever had one. I did, but I ended up paying for it in a slightly different fashion than I had expected.
fair.
Well, I mean, Terry, seriously, thank you for spending some time with us about this.
I can hear you talk all day.
Yeah, I know, I love it.
I want to hear more stories.
Well, that's very nice of you.
The book is out October 2nd. You can pre-order it now if you go to terrybrooks.net. Street Freaks is out there. Before we let you go, one last question. If somebody were to come to you, and they probably do, and just ask you, how do I get started writing? Because just like you said, I've got 50 pages of a book, but I can't quite get there. What's that word of encouragement that you would tell and impress upon people if they were to ask you that question?
I do get that question a lot. And the answer is pretty simple. You have to want to do it bad enough that you'll sweat blood and tears to get the job done. You have to absolutely eat, drink, breathe, whatever, writing as a way of life. And I mean, it's a culture that you get into. It's also something a skill, and you learn it by doing it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it.
That's a good
if you're any
point.
good. And you have to be patient with yourself. That's what I mostly say. It takes a while. You don't just sit down and write a book and it's all done and hooray for you. It takes years to get something that's really good. I was published at 13. I started writing at 10. I got this little story.
Wow.
Yeah, well, I had this
Still
little
impressive.
story about Lincoln, because I was from Illinois and everybody writes about Lincoln in school. So I wrote about Lincoln for a historical journal, and they published it in the local historical journal. That was it.
Aw.
13, I said, I'm on my way. I was right, because 20 years later, it was, a Conestoga wagon kind of trip.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did get it done, but I think you have to understand it. Really, you have to read a lot, and you have to write a lot, and you have to take time, and mostly you got to be patient with yourself and understand that you will get better the more you do it. And most writers write for years and years before they have any success, if ever. So it's it's something you would do. You got to want to do it bad enough that if you never have anything published, you'd still do it and be happy with it.
Do it for the love of it.
Yep.
I love that. Terry, again, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you, Justin. I enjoyed it.
Wow.
Yay.
Seriously, thank you so much to Terry for spending some time with us. Do go pick up his book. Go to terrybrooks.net.
Net.
Exactly.
Yes.
I want to make sure I got that right. Street Freaks is out on October 2nd.
Yep.
You can pre-order it now. Get the super special limited edition signed versions.
Yeah.
Until next time, guys, stay nerdy.
Your inner geek wants to come out and play, but where to go? Join Vernon Wells, the ultimate club where you and your fellow geeks can hang out, play games, and just nerd out 24/7. Whether you love RPGs, video games, or are just a major fan of sci-fi and geek culture, Vernon Wells has something for everyone. Let your geek flag fly at Vernon Wells. Sign up today and see for yourself. VNW.club. That's VNW.club.